our lunch hour conversation with our special guest speaker today, Julie DiCaro. I want to invite all of you to just sort of welcome her warmly because she is the kickoff person for what's a kickoff series of events for our college this year in celebration of Women's History Month. And so, first a round of welcome. And then we'll tell you why you're applauding, right? So this series is one that the college has been looking forward to sponsoring because we have all kinds of programming across the university from other colleges in honor of Women's History Month, but there hadn't been anything specific to the humanities and social sciences. And so this year with Rachel Pollack and Eileen Long, and a little bit of work from me, we put together a grant from Indiana Humanities that's sponsored by the NEH to do a multi-day festival highlighting a variety of different ways the humanities can touch on issues that intersect with women's history, but also just differential treatment and historical issues about inequality in general. So we decided that we would pick 3 kinds of fields in which we find underrepresentation of women historically, and so when breaking into those fields has a tendency to have its own flavor and character. Today we'll be talking about sports in particular. Tomorrow night it's going to be arts with the Feminist Film Festival from Columbia College Chicago presenting 7 film shorts by international filmmakers at the Hammond campus from 5:30 to 7:30 with the co-director of that festival, which just played in Chicago a few weeks ago, actually available for commentary and contextualization of those 7 shorts. And I'll just say, this will be really fun because not only do they span their range in terms of length, we were looking at them earlier today, but also in terms of genre. So everything from dramedy to whimsical comedy to horror to documentary. And I think that'll be a really exciting way to see these experiences through a different kind of lens that really represents our college as far as the arts go. And then Thursday night, we'll have our focus on politics, and Chicago Women Take Action will be coming to do a panel conversation that'll be led by one of our own professors, Megan Rinker, who has published work in this area that's gotten international acclaim. And they'll be doing a conversation with 3 members of Chicago Women Take Action on the subject of From Anita Hill to #MeToo, reflecting on connections between and differences between these major movements that have happened in relatively recent history. So we're really excited about these events. I'm particularly excited that we have Julie with us here today, and I think we're going to run this as a relatively informal thing.
Yes.
After I tell them some wonderful things.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? Okay, great. So Julie is a Peabody Award-winning journalist and sports broadcaster, and she's here today to share lessons with us about at least some of it about toxic tweets, reflecting on her viral video from 2016 that was made with Sarah Spain, #MoreThanMe. She's a former attorney and a current update anchor at 670 The Score in Chicago, who frequently writes and reports on women's issues in sports, such as rape, domestic violence, and sexism in the sports media. She's written for Deadspin, The Huffington Post, The Chicago Tribune, and is a featured columnist at The Cauldron/Sports Illustrated and CBS Sports. And I know that you have done many more presentations than we could possibly shake a stick at. So we are excited to have you here to share your work and your thoughts and your experiences with us today.
Thanks, everybody. I'm really glad to be here. And when I give speeches, sometimes I give formal speeches. I really prefer to have like a conversation with the audience. So don't feel like you have to wait till the end to ask questions. Throw your hand in the air because I want to talk about whatever you want to talk about, right? So if something strikes your fancy, or if you have a comment or something you want to say, feel free to just jump into the conversation. So my name is Julie DiCaro. I'm currently a nighttime host at 670 The Score in Chicago. I'm also a sports writer and sometimes a culture writer too. And one of the things I think that's so interesting right now about the way that women are finding their way in the sports industry is that so many of us are doing what's called the gig economy. So because it is so difficult, especially in sports, for women to get hired full time, you find a lot of us who are like, I do this, and I also do this, and then I do a blog that I get paid for, and I also write for this site, and I do, and so it's a constant cobbling together of 3 or 4 different part-time jobs to try to make one job. And so I think a lot of us are in that situation. People always ask me how I transitioned from law to sports writing and being in sports, and the reason it happened was because, first, this is where I disclosed that I went to IU, so if anybody wants to leave, but when I graduated from journalism school, I wanted to be a sports writer, and there just weren't many women doing that. There was a Melissa Isaacson at the Chicago Tribune who covered the Bulls during the Michael Jordan years. And that was pretty much it. I mean, once in a while I would see Leslie Visser on CBS Sports on the sidelines, and I didn't want to be a sideline reporter. And there really was nobody to look at to say, this is what I want to be, and here's how you get there. And so I really do believe that representation matters so much for young women. There's a great picture of the ballerina Misty Copeland, the ballet dancer Misty Copeland, and she's talking to a room full of like 17, 18, 19, 20 little African-American girls all wearing pink tutus and sitting there just gazing adoringly at her. And so I feel sort of the same way when I'm with women like Melissa Ludke, who broke the barriers and sued Major League Baseball so that she could get into the locker room, or Pam Oliver, who's been on the sidelines of the NFL forever. There aren't a ton of women who, especially in sports radio, who've gotten to attain the level of host. So I feel pretty honored that I was able to do that, but only because of so many women who came before me. But the reason I went into law was because, like I said, there was nobody I could look at and say, oh, that's what I want to be. There just wasn't that person out there. So I became a lawyer, and this is the way I think tons of women get into the industry. When the internet sort of exploded with blogs, especially around 2005, 2006, 2007, I started frequenting sports blogs. Cubs baseball was always what I wanted to write about and cover. So I started frequenting the SB Nation blogs, which at the time were like the first sports blogs out there, and developed a following, and eventually started my own blog and updated it. You know, they would say if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life, which isn't entirely true. But I mean, I don't think I went more than a day without updating that blog in probably 5 years. And eventually the Chicago Tribune decided to start their own blog network, and they asked me to be the first blog as part of their network and then to help them run the network. So that was how I got into the industry. And I feel like if I had done the typical thing, that the traditional path into sports writing at that point was go to a really small town paper, cover high school sports for a million years, hopefully work your way up, wait until the guy who's got the beat that you want dies someday. Because sports writers never retire, they die at their desks, and then maybe you'll get a shot at it. And that wasn't anything that I was interested in doing. But when the internet happened, that makes me feel so old to say, when the internet happened. But I mean, it really was sort of a revelation that you could do what you wanted to do without having to have a man tell you that it was okay, or a man to hire you. And sports is still very much dominated by men doing the hiring process. So even though we're starting to see more women come into the field, they're still at the lower levels, and I don't know how much changes on a grand scale until we get women into positions where they can hire other women. But that was how I got into the industry, and we see more and more women doing this now. If you want to be in radio, start a podcast. If you want to be on camera, start a YouTube channel, and just start doing it. And I think that has been really sort of a sea change for women in the industry, because, like I said, you don't have to convince an older man that you can do the job. And frankly, one of the things we always talk about in sports media is that people hire what they know. And mostly what they know are other white men. So if you look at my station, there's one African-American on-air host, there's me, and everything else is white men. And that is true for most radio stations. I mean, ESPN Chicago doesn't even have a woman. Considering that women make up somewhere between 40 and 50% of every single major sports fan base, it is absolutely crazy to me that the sports media doesn't reflect the fan base. So there was an article in Reuters a couple of years ago about the fact that the NFL's fan base is only growing because of women. If there were no women, the NFL would be losing fans. And yet, we continue to see, every time I turn on the TV on Sundays, you see a table with 5 guys sitting there, and then the women are on the sidelines. And, and there's some really important sideline reporters, like Andrea Kramer, who finally got her shot at being in the booth this past season for Amazon. Her and Hannah Storm have an Amazon Prime broadcast of the NFL games, which is terrific, and everybody should listen to it. But it's always been sort of the same thing, and everyone always asks me, how do we get to the point where things change? And the only answer I have for that really is that eventually we hope that women get into a position where they're able to hire more women, because it's sort of a big issue right now. So that's how I wound up in this industry. And sports media, in a lot of ways, is sort of a throwback to another time. If you take ESPN out of the mix, the numbers of women in sports media actually goes down over the course of the last few years. Women are actually leaving the industry. And a huge part of it is because of the online harassment, and sometimes in-person harassment, and telephone harassment, and harassment at your house, and harassment at your place of work. It's a big, big issue. So I don't know how many of you saw the Mean Tweets video. It was called More Than Mean. It was a video that Sarah Spain and I did. I had written a piece for Sports Illustrated about what it was like to be a woman working in sports media. And I reached out to a lot of other women in the industry, Jamel Hill, Michelle Beadle, Jen Latta at ESPN, a whole bunch of women, and basically asked, do you have any screenshots of tweets that I can include in this piece about how hard it is for women online when you work in sports? And to a person, they said, do you want me to send you just a couple, or do you want the entire folder?
Whoa.
Because we all have an entire folder of harassing, mean, horrible, abusive things sent to us. This all started for me because I had to take a day off of work after I reported on Patrick Kane's sexual assault case, which was never actually a case, but the allegations against him. I was in touch with some very well-placed sources within law enforcement, and I was reporting what they told me. It was vetted by my employer, it was vetted by my editor before anything went out, and it blew up. It was crazy. I got death threats. I had people outside my office taking pictures of the door to my building and saying, this is, I know this is how you get in the building every day. And it wasn't like the main entrance to the building, it was like a side entrance that not a lot of people use. So I wound up staying home from work, and from there I decided to write about it. And after I'd written about this piece, it got I wrote about harassment, it got a lot of play nationally. I did sort of a little media tour about it. And then a couple months later, it had all sort of been forgotten. Meanwhile, and this is typically what happens with this stuff, everybody gets upset about it for a few days or weeks, and then it goes away and everyone sort of forgets about it again. So these wonderful guys who work at a PR firm in Chicago wanted to do something that would be sort of a public service announcement, and they wanted to put the issue back on everyone's radar. So they asked me, do you have any, I got this random email from this guy I didn't know, would you come to a warehouse in Ukrainian village and let us film people reading horrible tweets to you? And they just caught me at a time when I had just had it with tweeting that week. And I was like, sure, why not? Yeah, whatever. So I didn't know these guys, they didn't know me. And what we did was we sort of pulled guys off the street and we handed them the tweets that people send to us, and we had them read them to us. And it starts off kind of funny, and it gets increasingly dark and threatening and terrible. And the thing that is so striking about it, I guess, is how uncomfortable the men become. Well, Sarah and I have seen all these and heard it all a million times, and I think that's why it resonated with so many people, was because it was upsetting for them to see men get upset. That when you see women get upset, it's sort of like, oh, well, she's hysterical. But when you see these men getting upset, that really resonated with people. And people would come up to Sarah and I, we went around just speaking to her at a bunch of campuses afterwards, and they would say, that was really unfair what you did to those guys. Oh. Did you tell them, are they okay? And we'd be like, yes, they're fine. But I hate to say it, but I really feel like that was why this resonated so strongly. So this is the video that we actually sent to the Peabodys, sort of like as our submission video for the Peabody Awards. And we sent it to a bunch of other awards too. And this sort of shows a little bit of the video and then sort of like the reaction it got when it came out. So take a look.
Many women in sports media are harassed or threatened online just for doing their jobs. It's a huge problem in the US, but rarely talked about. Our goal was to raise awareness and change attitudes. In an era when people think of mean tweets as a funny late-night sketch, we created a video and social awareness campaign to prove some tweets are more than mean. They're harassment. Our idea was simple. We asked real guys to read real comments made to women sports reporters directly to them.
One of the players should beat you to death, like before you are.
And we watched men squirm as they faced the true power of harassment.
I hope you get right together.
Oh.
We uploaded the video to social media and asked people to share it with hashtag #MoreThanMe. And then Our video, which cost $300 to produce, became a social movement. More Than Me trended on Twitter and Facebook and got 7 million video views with no paid support. But best of all, it launched an international dialogue.
A new video has gone viral. Female sportscasters are enduring harassment.
I'm like in shock.
In 3 days, we generated more than 500 million media impressions. Athletes, Oscar winners, and celebrities shared our message. Teachers, parents used our video as a lesson. Countless women shared their own experiences with harassment.
So I've been dealing with this at every single job that I've had.
But that was only half the battle. We also needed men to open their eyes to the problem, and they did.
This was a shocking thing.
I didn't realize just how bad it was. Our lives as colleagues absolutely deserve.
By sparking this dialogue, we changed attitudes and we made people think twice before they type.
So a couple things about that. First of all, if you're ever involved in a video and you have any inkling that it might go viral in any way, don't just show up after work like with no makeup on and like in a bad sweater. Because like at this point, like 15 million people have seen this video now, and like I literally have no makeup on, and I'm like the least flattering sweater in the entire world. So I sort of wish I could go back and like do that entire thing over. But I mean, it really was just sort of a spur of the moment kind of, let's just see if we can make a video, and we hoped that it would resonate within the industry. We didn't realize that it would go as big as it did. My parents actually found out because they saw it on CBS Evening News. Like, you can see Scott Pelley introducing it. It was like the lead story on CBS Evening News. My parents were like, "What?" when they saw it. It was a big moment. That day, I had been home sick from work and took a nap and woke up and had like 750 notifications from Twitter, something like that. So we watched it sort of go around the world, and we could tell where it was by who we were talking to. So it started off talking with, like the U.S. and we started on the West Coast because it came out like at 3 p.m, and then the next morning it was the East Coast of the U.S. and then we were talking to people in London and then Germany and then Russia and China and Australia, and sort of went around. And the thing that was so striking about it was that how many people have this experience, how many women have had this experience. And it's not just women in sports. If you're a woman in a male-dominated industry, so I know women in the music industry get it a ton, women in gaming have gotten it, obviously Gamergate's a huge issue. It's a universal experience, and it is so frightening. Sorry?
The military's really
Oh,
bad.
I'm sure, yeah, for sure. So it's really been something that I think not only alerted the world to what women in sports were going through, but what women in general are going through. And a lot of that is just being a woman online with an opinion. It doesn't even matter if you're in a male-dominated field. So the other thing was, you see Mike Golick and Bomani Jones, both of whom I call friends, on there say, I had no idea. And that just infuriated so many of us because we knew, we've been talking about this for years. Women have been screaming about this. And it was kind of shocking to hear the guys say, I had no idea this was going on. And the thing is that a lot of guys will say, well, men get it too. I get it too. People call me names. Go look at what people say to Stephen A. Smith, or go look what they say to Skip Bayless. But the difference is, there's a difference between people who are courting the controversy and people who are just trying to do their jobs. So for some people, saying ridiculous things online, having it blow up, having it trend, having everyone be yelling at them is part of their brand. But for us, that was not the case. Sarah and I at the time, I think, were both update anchors. We hadn't moved on to hosting yet. And so we were basically just reading scores, and that would engender that kind of response from people. So it was a lot. It happened really quickly, and it burned out kind of just as quickly. And the people ask me all the time, are things better now than they were then? And the answer is no, because Sarah and I put a huge target on our backs by doing that, first of all. But second of all, with the new administration in the White House, what came along with it was sort of, and I think you see in tweets from the president all the time, it's okay to talk this way to people. This is okay. And so it has gotten worse, I think, not just for women, but for people of color, for people of different ethnicities, different religions. It feels like Twitter is just sort of just this, we always call it a hell site, where I was like, every day I say, like, I don't know why I'm on this hell site at some point on Twitter. It has become such an indispensable tool for people in the media. This morning, news of Mike Trout getting a 12-year, $340 million contract from the Angels broke on Twitter. And you cannot do your job if you work in media without Twitter. Because what happens is people report it first, then they go write the story. So if you're waiting for the story to come out, you're gonna be behind. And especially if you're, like I am, you're on the radio and you're talking sports, you need to know up to the minute what's happening. I can't wait an hour for someone to write a story on Mike Trout. I need to know when it happens because people are gonna wanna talk about it. So we have to be on Twitter. There's, people say all the time, why don't you just leave Twitter? I can't. Like, my job requires me to be there. And not only that, there are things about Twitter that are really wonderful. In a lot of ways, it is the world's biggest sports bar. So there are times, I don't know if you guys remember the movie Sharknado. When Sharknado first came out, that was a magical night to be on Twitter because everybody was sort of, what are you guys talking about? Oh, this movie on Sci-Fi, and then everyone was tuning into it. And it was like all of Twitter, this huge community, was all watching this movie and tweeting about it, and it was hysterical and fun, and a reminder of the best parts of Twitter. But this is the worst part. And I think we've reached a point in society, I keep waiting for someone to come out with something that will replace Twitter, that will allow us all to sort of scooch on over to something else. But there really hasn't been anything, and I don't know that there will be something that comes that is as up to date, that moves as quickly. And if you're an information junkie like me, it's just sort of like feed me information, and Twitter does that like this at light speed, and so there's nothing else like it. So, is it any better? Not really. I've probably learned how to handle it better. I think there's good days and bad days. There's days when I'm just like, I don't care, block, 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 block. There's other days where, for whatever reason, maybe I had a fight with my husband that morning, or maybe I'm feeling bad about myself for whatever reason, that stuff really still finds its mark. And the thing about trolls is they're able to find whatever you don't like most about yourself. They can zero in on that. It is unbelievable. I even saw when the school here tweeted that I was coming, I saw all these replies under it, and every single one of them was from someone I had blocked. I couldn't even see the replies. Same thing with when I tweet out, when my station tweets out about the new podcast that I have, I'll see 15 replies, and I can't see any of them because they're all people I blocked. So, people will say a lot of times to women, ignore the trolls. And I think that is 30% good advice and 70% bad advice. And here's why. There's, first of all, this perception that trolls are harmless. And they're not. Trolls wear you down day after day after day after day. And I worry about women like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is such a target for people right now, because you can laugh it off and joke, and make jokes about it and say you don't care for a while. Eventually it wears you down. And it's certainly, I've had therapy, I've had all kinds of things to try to learn how to deal with this stuff. And I don't know that there's really any magical way that you learn how to deal with it other than you try to build up a skin that's thick enough that this stuff doesn't get to you on most days. But I don't know that there's any way that you make it so that it doesn't bother you ever. The other thing is that it's sort of assuming that all trolls want the same thing, which is attention. And if you just ignore them, they'll go away, which isn't really the case. Different trolls have different motivations. So some trolls just want your attention for that moment. And if you go look at their timeline, they will, they're saying horrible stuff to me, they're saying stuff to Sarah, they're saying stuff to Jamel Hill, they're saying stuff to basically every woman who has an opinion. They're there in your face telling you what they think. Those trolls are the kind of guys who, if you ignore them, they probably go away. But there's a much more insidious, more harmful kind of troll. And these are people that want something from you. And what they want is to destroy your reputation, your profession, the way you feel about yourself. I've had the same group of guys, and it's expanded now to maybe 60. Started off with like 6. Who have been at me since the fall of 2015. And every time I say anything, they've created multiple accounts, they are there, they have gone back through all my old tweets, they know everything about me, they know where my kids go to school. They did a public record search for me when my neighborhood sued our homeowners association. They knew about that, and they were tweeting about, oh, your homeowners association hates you, and stuff like that. Like, it is a real sickness, and I'm not really sure what motivates it, but I know that ignoring it doesn't make it work because, or doesn't make it go away, because they just amplify their behavior then. And this is something that I think a lot of us don't really know how to deal with and really need the help of our employers. I know that after More Than Mean came out, ESPN basically created a task force to handle this, and they have told people, we know this is you tweeting, you know, we've traced your IP address, we know who you are. Unfortunately, my employer hasn't done anything like that, and their point of view is still, well, this is your private Twitter account, so it has nothing to do with us. And so a lot of times I think that we feel like we're just sort of out there twisting in the wind. You know, and of course people will say, oh, you know, we can get security to take you to your car every night or whatever, but that's, you know, that's physical protection. And I think that there is a huge element of mental protection here that people need as well. Not that you don't ever want to see anything bad about yourself. I mean, I think that that comes with the territory. If you're in the public eye, people are going to tell you what they don't like about you. But there's definitely a line between valid criticism and what a lot of this stuff is. And women get this in a much different way than men do. Men get, you're stupid, you're an idiot, I can't believe you have your job. Women get rape threats, death threats, I'm gonna kill you and rape your corpse. They get, I mean, people have threatened my children, they've figured out where my kids go to school. Just really insidious, violent tweets. And the one thing that Twitter especially doesn't recognize is that there are a lot of people who know that if it's not an explicit threat, Twitter's not going to do anything about it. So they stay just this side of the line, but they hit you with 50, 75, 100 tweets a day. And so what you have is this deluge of extremely questionable stuff. You know, people have created accounts that say they're my boss and talking about us having slept together and that's how I got my job. There's an account for like my Peabody Award. Just saying all kinds of ridiculous stuff. There's accounts that claim that when I've raised money for charity, I've kept it all, or so, I don't even know exactly. I mean, just things that are, and there's no remedies against these people, right? I mean, law enforcement hasn't caught up with how to handle this, and you're just sort of stuck. There's really no one to go to. There have been some people that have tried suing for defamation, but it's a lot of legal wrangling to try to get to where you can even find out who these people are, and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of money. So we're all just sort of stuck. And it's a real tough situation for women especially to be in, and it's gonna have to come a time when employers figure out how to handle this, because it's difficult to do your job when you're sitting there at work. I've gotta have Twitter open, I'm on the air, and all of a sudden it starts up. It's difficult to concentrate on what you're doing, and so whether that leads to employers taking more responsibility for stopping this, or whether it leads to women just not getting into the industry because of it, I don't know. When I go around to college campuses and I speak to young women, I hear very often, I wanted to be an investigative reporter, but now I'm gonna go into PR because I can't handle the harassment. And I think that's something really concerning, at a time when we need women's voices more than ever, to hear women saying that they're not gonna go into media because they're afraid of what putting their voice out there means, is something that's really upsetting to me personally to hear.
Have you ever engaged with a troll?
Oh yeah.
Is there like a visceral satisfaction that is very fleeting, or is it?
No, I mean, one of the things I hate about Ignore the Trolls is that it just sort of suggests that you should sit there and absorb all of this and never stand up for yourself. And I think that probably goes contrary to what most of us have been told as growing as kids. You know, when there's a bully, you stand up to the bully and then the bully shuts up. Well, these bullies don't shut up. But that doesn't mean that there isn't like, I mean, sometimes someone will say something really stupid, I'll retweet it and I'll make a joke about it, and then my friends and I will sort of bat him around for a while on Twitter, and then we just block him and let him go after we've made a fool out of him. And there is a satisfaction in doing that. Sometimes I do that and then I wonder, am I now becoming as bad as these guys because I'm publicly shaming them to make myself feel better? I don't know how many of you have read the book Shrill or now seen the Hulu show, Lindy West's book Shrill. She actually did a segment for This American Life where she figured out who her troll was, she got in touch with him and she interviewed him. And he was, I mean, really terrible. He was pretending to be her dead father and talking about how he was ashamed of her because she was fat and just like horrible, horrible stuff. And he was, there's always this thing with celebrities too, that you can get to the person and talk to them, and then you'll realize that they're a person, they'll realize you're a person, and then Sarah Silverman did this with a troll. And, and then she found out that he was, struggling with addiction or something, and she talked with him. That's not the way it ends for most of us. I mean, and so I saw these people retweeting her interaction with this guy, which was wonderful, and saying, this is the way you handle a troll. And I was like, that is not the way you handle a troll. Because first of all, I'm not Sarah Silverman. When I respond to a troll, he's not impressed that I'm just talking to him. He doesn't care. So, I mean, a lot of times you get an even worse reaction when you engage with these guys. But sometimes I do it just because I feel like when someone says, so here's what happened. When I went to when we wanted to go to the Peabody Awards, it's $1,500 a ticket to go to the Peabody Awards. And then it's an extra $400 if you want to buy your Peabody, because you don't get to keep it. So I really wanted to go. So I have 2 kids, and they play a ton of sports, and whatever. I'm like a working mom. So I did a GoFundMe to go to the Peabody Awards. And for some reason, they just set the trolls like over the edge. So that has been their thing forever. Like, don't donate any money to Julia. She steals your money. Which I don't even understand how you get from one to the other. But that was how this whole thing started. So when someone says, when I do a fundraiser for like a girls' cricket team in Pakistan, and someone says, don't donate to her, she's just going to take the money for herself, I feel like I need to say something about that. But at the same time, when you're constantly saying, one of the things that's so frustrating about online harassment is when you're being harassed, you want to talk about it all the time, because you want to say to people, look at this jerk, look what he said to me. But at the same time, people hear it and they're just like, okay, enough. I know you're getting harassed, just ignore it. And so people get sick of hearing you talk about it too. At the same time, you're sort of like on a loop in your head where you can't really get away from it. So and I know plenty of women who have left media and have gone into academia or other areas where they can, deal with sports and social justice outside of being in the spotlight because of this kind of stuff. Yeah.
So, you touched on it a little bit when you're talking to young women, and I'm a huge Chicago fan. I'm a White Sox fan, sorry.
That's okay.
I've been
You guys have got good times
diehard-
coming.
Yeah, I've been a diehard White Sox fan since I was a little girl. So, back in my 20s, that was a dream of mine, right? Oh, it would just be great if I could do something, right for the White Sox. I think now the 43-year-old version of me would be better equipped to handle this.
Absolutely.
What do you say to 22-year-old girls who are just that's brutal. That can mess with them.
Absolutely. This happened to me in my 40s. If I had been in my 20s, I would have broken. I could not. There was a time in my life, I was a gymnast, right? So being fat was like the end of the world. And for so much of my youth, it was like, oh my God, don't be fat, don't be fat. So I have guys come on and be like, you're fat, would have just been the end of the world for me. But I wish that I had come to this kind of confidence earlier in my life, but I just don't know that women get there that quickly. Hopefully the next generation gets there faster. But one of the things I tell them, and this is something I think is so important especially for Women's History Month, but for every month, we've been so conditioned to see other women as competition, and we're always pitted against each other. And it's doubly true in sports media because there's going to be maybe one token woman, and it's not going to be, there's not going to be a table of 4 women sitting there talking sports. It's going to be a bunch of guys, and they're maybe going to have one woman, and maybe she'll monitor the social media tweets or whatever. But there are so few women who have a seat at the table that we're all competing with each other. And one of the things I tell young women is get your group, your warrior group of women who are going to stand around you and protect you now. Because I have that group with Jessica Luther, with a bunch of women who, with Jen Latta, with a bunch of women who work in sports, and we all have like a private DM group going, and we pick each other up off the floor. And there was, I think we all go through that phase where you want to be like the cool girl who hangs out with the guys. Especially if you're in sports, that's like a big thing, to be the cool girl. So the cool girl doesn't care if there's sexist jokes because she gets it. And the cool girl doesn't point out that there's no other women in the room because the cool girl likes being the only woman in the room. And and I feel like this is an issue especially for young women, and especially in sports, because there's always that idea that you are super hot, but you wear a really tight jersey and you drink beer and you eat hot dogs and you're like one of the guys kind of thing, And I think that is really harmful for women in sports media. So I've told women very early, start thinking now about how you're gonna handle this when it happens to you, because it's gonna happen to you. Get your group of girls around you and be ready to defend each other. And not just defend each other, but to promote each other too. One of the best things about my group of friends on Twitter that are other women in sports writers is that we all share each other's work. And I feel like that gets lost so often, because, you know, whenever there's a whole group of, like, especially in baseball, a whole group of white guys who all share each other's work, and like, no matter what they write, you would think it is the greatest thing that has ever been written, because every other, like, white guy runs to, like, retweet it and talk about how great they are. And women need to do that for each other, because oftentimes we don't get that from the men, who by far outnumber us in this industry. So whether it's ESPN or Yahoo or another, you know, outlet that I don't work for, I try to share women's work as often as I can. And I think that's really important. But this idea of women as competition for each other has got to go away. We've done ourselves so much damage competing with each other when really we should be allies. Yeah.
So what kind of law did you practice? And is there anything from your legal background that emerges to you in terms of how you think about what next steps might be, or what you might do moving forward in your career in dealing with these kinds of issues?
Yeah,
on a daily basis?
well, I was a public defender, which I love. That's like the best job in the world. And then I went on to work for women who needed orders of protection, I did family law for women who were in abusive relationships, and for men who were in abusive relationships too, because women are abusive as well. So I worked for a domestic violence legal advocacy organization, and that was sort of how I wound up out of law. I love law, but I have a very hard time with boundaries. So my clients would be calling me at like 12:30 at night all the time, and they need an ear, and they need a shoulder to cry on, and I just didn't know how to say no. And it was really, really draining for me. So when I got the opportunity to do something fun for a while, I was like, I'll do this for a while, and maybe someday I would love to go back and be a public defender again. Maybe, I think it's not a job you have when you have kids, you know, because you're in jury trials late night, and it's very, very draining in terms of the emotions that are involved. And so I think it's sort of a job you have when you're very young or after your kids have moved out of the house. So maybe I'll go back to it at some point. But the thing I think about and I think this serves women especially well in this industry about law, is that I think I've learned how to say, here's what I think, and here's all the things that back it up. And if I don't have things that back it up, I don't say it, because I know that the guys are going to come out of the woodwork to tell me I'm stupid, you know what you're talking about, this is what girls shouldn't be talking about sports and blah, blah, blah. So I try to have like my argument all defended before I even make it. And I think that helps, whether it's in writing or, you know, hosting a radio show or whatever it is. And the other thing is that when you're a public defender, oftentimes you have to take cases to trial because you can't plead guilty for whatever reason. So like, your guy's on probation for something else. If he pleads guilty to this, he'll violate his probation, he's gonna go to jail. So it's a shoplifting case, and he's on video taking it, putting it in his bag and walking out the door, but you still have to go to trial. So you get used to like making a fool of yourself and being embarrassed. And I feel like being embarrassed when you're a young woman is such a, oh my God, I'm gonna be embarrassed. That's the worst thing could ever happen to me. And then being a public defender and some of the arguments you make and the things that happen in court that are just ridiculous. I mean, night court is by far the most realistic legal show, especially if you're a misdemeanor public defender. And so I got used to like looking stupid, and then it got to a point where it didn't bother me as much, you know, that I don't care if other people think I'm stupid. I know I'm not. Sometimes I have to do things for reasons I can't disclose. And so it's the same thing, you know, on the radio, that I think that if I was 25 and all these texts were coming in telling me how stupid I was, I would probably just crumple into a puddle and die. But now it's like, I don't care, you're stupid too, you know? I mean, or people say like, you know, you're an amateur at radio, and they spell it Y-O-U-R, and I just say, yeah. And I say, you're an amateur at spelling and grammar, you know? And I feel that's something that I didn't have early on in my you know, womanhood. So, yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
What would be the possibility of a law that would figure out the address of a troll, and then not only could you block that address, but all the other addresses that they come
Block
up
them
with?
by IP address. That's something that we've been asking Twitter to do for quite some time.
But a law, not just Twitter, a
Wouldn't
law
violate
that could be
freedom of
passed.
speech?
Probably. I mean, I don't know. I mean, well, the thing is,
But
Twitter
it's
is not
harassment.
subject to
I understand.
the
that.
First Amendment.
But until they get charged with harassment and get.
Yeah,
freedom of
I don't,
speech, so-
I don't know. I mean,
If the
media law is
law
not
would
my
change, though.
area of
That's what I'm
expertise.
talking about.
Here's how people have been sort of doing it. So what you do is you file a case in small claims court for, against John Doe, Twitter user, at handle blah, blah, blah. And then, once you have filed the case, you file for discovery. And in part of discovery, you tell Twitter, there's an ongoing litigation, we need your IP addresses. That has worked in some cases, and so they've been able to figure out who the people are and actually sue them. But, I mean, like I said, that takes a ton of money, a ton of time, a lot of legal wrangling with Twitter, who doesn't want to give up those addresses. And it's not just sexist misogynists, it's also, Nazis and white supremacists, and it's sort of, the question has become, is the trolling a bug for Twitter, or is it a feature? And it feels like for a lot of people it's a feature. So, I don't know. I have this feeling that at some point there's just gonna be a mass exodus from Twitter. I think we're all just sort of waiting for it to happen, but at the same time, there's gonna have to be something else that replaces your ability to get news at light speed. And right now, there just hasn't been anything like that. Yeah.
So, I guess I'm curious from the news writer's angle, why there are other tools out there, like Facebook is one that probably more people honestly are on that still than Twitter. Why hasn't all the news folks just decided, we're all leaving this, we're going to go to this other platform that allows the same benefits, but I can control who can respond?
Well, I'd say the initial reason, although Twitter is now starting to use algorithms, but the initial reason is that on Twitter, it was supposed to be that you see every tweet sent by people you're following in chronological order. On Facebook, you don't get that. You see maybe 25–30% of the people you're following and the content they post because of the algorithms. So, and Twitter's much quicker. So that was the initial reason. Facebook now, I think, has just gotten such a bad reputation because of all the fake news that goes on there, and anti-vaxxers, and my mother-in-law, like this, the stuff my mother-in-law sends me off Facebook is just unbelievable. So I think, and the thing too about Twitter was that it's very, humor is the currency of Twitter, first of all. So, and it's also for a lot of us who are writers or who are creative, it was a creative writing exercise because you had to make your point in 140 characters. And it was always a game, to sort of see, could you make the joke in that many characters? Or could you, and it was really sort of stimulating and creative. A lot of that has been lost. And now Twitter's starting to use algorithms as well. So, although you have the option of turning the algorithm off. So, I don't think people will go back to Facebook. Instagram isn't fast enough, doesn't show you the same. So there's really just nothing. They tried to do, what's it called, Mastodon? Did anybody go on Mastodon? I did it, and I was like, I'm gonna do this now, and then I forgot about it like 2 days later. So clearly, it's not giving me like what I need. But honestly, I do feel like, attention spans are shorter now. We're constantly trying to assimilate information. The ADD is rampant in our society, and I've been diagnosed with ADHD, and I think that it really, I don't jump around, but my brain jumps around. And so Twitter is like cocaine for me. It just gives me new things all the time. When I'm on Facebook, I sit there and I'm like, refresh, come on, give me something new. But Twitter is it's just a nonstop, feeding my brain. So I just think they're fundamentally different. Different people, yeah. Yeah.
I'm a historian, and I follow a bunch of people on Twitter with different groups and such, but there's an ongoing debate between an actual historian at a university and Dinesh D'Souza.
Oh, Kevin, and,
Yeah.
what's his name, Kevin?
Kevin Cruz or something?
Kevin Cruz, yeah.
Yeah, and so there's like a tattoo prof is also in there as well.
Yeah.
And it's like every time he says something, it's like he comes back, and so
Right.
there's an ongoing and there used to be John Fia used to be in with Barton. There's like who has the right U.S. history narrative.
Yeah.
And there seems to be this, and it's for the ones who are actual historians who, sorry to stop people, but they're actual historians who went to college or in grad school for history.
Yeah.
In their fact checking him on a regular basis.
Right.
But he doesn't, but so I'm wondering as I follow this, which I find humorous at times too,
Yeah.
that it's
it just keeps feeding the Sousa's agenda
Yeah.
and all his followers.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, but you can't let
it go unrebutted.
bad
I mean,
facts,
right,
you know.
right.
And there's another historian that I follow, Ann Little, she's out of Colorado State. She's a blog person for a long time, and she posted, she's going on spring break, and she posted this series of public service announcements about how to be a good person in the world, and I'm going on spring break, I'll see you later. But I was wondering, you know, I think this is a different category of trolls or fighting, and I'm wondering, does that get to more what a Twitter should be in the public discourse model? Or, you know, using Twitter as a means for public discourse?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think it's a double-edged sword. So on the one hand, I mean, I learned so much from following not just historians, but like geneticists and environmental scientists and, you know, when I did a thread on Twitter that was like, list your favorite like engineer, scientist, or historian. And it just went on for days and days and days. Because I think that there is really Neil deGrasse Tyson broke my heart with the Me Too allegations, but I really do think he tapped into something with this desire for adult education, like ongoing education. And not all of us can go take a class, but all of us can go on Twitter and have really smart people from universities telling you things that you didn't otherwise know. And so that is a wonderful thing about Twitter and something that I really love about it. But then there's the argument of, you've got someone like Dinesh D'Souza. I mean, obviously, he doesn't care about facts. He doesn't care about the accuracy of what he says. This is his brand. I'm just going to say something wacky. And then the question is, when someone like Kevin Cruz, I think his name is, who's terrific, and is doing a public service by telling us what the real version of history is, or what the real facts are you then promoting him by bringing him to everyone's attention yet again? But at the same time, you can't let him say things and just let them go, unresponded to, so it's a real, I mean, I think that if you're gonna have Dinesh D'Souza's in the world, certainly you want historians out there to rebut what he says, and make sure that the proper information is getting out there. At the same time, it's like, it's just another day when here he is in everyone's timelines again. And one of the things that is so upsetting about the trolling is the way that it teaches people to censor themselves. So Kevin obviously is someone who is very confident in himself and has a big following and can attack Dinesh D'Souza from a position of relative safety. And it feels like for a lot of women, you're not able to do that. So here's an example. Last night, the WNBA, ESPN did a terrific video for women's March Madness. It was great. It was it was like a video montage and cool lyrics and women slammed, and it was great. And then at the end of it is Kobe Bryant saying, and a Mamba mentality. And I lost it. I was like, first of all, the idea, I mean, Kobe Bryant, the idea that we've all just agreed to forget that he was charged with rape and that the only reason it went away was because this woman was harassed into dropping her lawsuit, or dropping her charges against him, is upsetting. But not only that, you've got a video, you're celebrating Women's March Madness. You don't need a dude in there telling everybody to watch. And so I found that really upsetting. And then it's like, do I say something because I feel like someone needs to say it? Or do I keep my mouth shut and avoid the harassment tonight? And there's been plenty of other times where I've been like, someone really needs to say something about this, but it cannot be me because I just can't handle it today. And then what you have is sort of like an across-the-board censoring, women self-censoring because they don't want to deal with what inevitably is going to come. And I remember when Bob Gibson, coach of the Toronto Blue Jays, scolded his players for acting like girls. He's like, I'm gonna give you guys a bunch of skirts. And everybody came running over to me, Julie, did you see this? Did you see this? And I was like, I saw it, and I'm not gonna say anything because I'm having a bad day and I don't feel like dealing with this. And I know that there's a lot of women that make those choices every single day. And so we have, there are women who are constantly in my messages saying, I'm so glad you said something about this because I was afraid to. And all that does is leave those people who do say something just out there hanging, as like live bait for everyone else. And I hate that is a place where women are, where we have to decide, is it worth the harassment for me to say something? That really stinks.
So, have you ever had any reason to think that any of your trolls actually were women?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I know some of them are women, for sure.
And so, can you say a little bit about those cases, how you found that out, or what might have motivated them?
Yeah, well, some of them, so now I do this thing where they always have like 14 followers, and I always go look, and it's always like the same 14 people, and if there's somebody new, I just block them. So, like, people will be like, she blocked me, and I never even said anything to her, and it's like, well, because you're following 5 other people who harass me all the time, that's why I blocked you. There are definitely those women who align themselves with the men, because that's how they think they're, I guess, this goes along with the cool girl thing, I think, too, how you're going to control the power of the situation by aligning yourself with those that have the power, even if it's not in your best interests. And this is what I always tell young women, that if you think that all these guys that love having you around because you're hot and you don't call them out when they say sexist things, if you think those are the guys that are gonna come defend you when the mob comes for you, you're wrong. And I know it because I've been there, and I know other women who have been there. So, and I think Barstool Sports is a perfect example of that. There are women that will defend Barstool Sports when they talk about raping women, when they talk about, when they mass harass other women online. There's always those women who are like, oh, you just can't take it because you don't want, these guys don't like you. I don't really know what to say to those women. I always say, like, someday you're gonna look back on this and you're gonna be sorry that you took this position. But when you have like a 25-year-old woman who's loving the fact that she gets attention from all these guys because she's one of the cool girls, you're not gonna convince her. So, I don't know. I mean, sometimes I just say there's a cold place in hell reserved for women who attack other women. But it's just a sad situation. I don't really have a good way to handle it. It's always shocking and alarming to me. And I know one of the people who's been sort of like whipping people up since I reported on Patrick Kane is a woman. And you know what? It was really weird too, because I'd have these much older women who would have these hashtags like Kaner's wife and stuff. And it was just these really bizarre situations of like hero worship and sports crush fandom from like women who were frankly old enough to know better. These weren't like 19-year-olds, and I never really knew how to handle that, except that you figure what's going on in someone's head if your entire day is spent online defending a man accused of rape. Like it's like the Michael Jackson people now, or the Harvey Weinstein people now that are on there all day defending. It's just like, this is what goes on in your head all day? This is really kind of sad. So yeah, I don't really have a good answer for that, and I wish I did. I'm still working on it. Maybe I'll get this thing. I always feel like by the time I'm ready to retire, I'll maybe have gotten this thing figured out. It's really interesting too, because Twitter sort of skews very young. And I wonder what's gonna happen as we get older. People are just gonna be like, enough of this, that's it.
But our current president, that is his platform.
Yeah.
And his followers are not a majority of younger people.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I feel like we're cultivating this whole culture of crazy old people who figure out how to use a phone. And, I mean, do you think it's gotten worse since we have this president?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, when you attack, it's basically given the okay to an entire group of people that this is the way you behave, that you attack people's wives for being ugly, and you call people criminals when they're not, and it's just sort of like any bounds of decency that there were on Twitter now sort of like gone out the window, because if the president's doing it, then it must be okay. And Facebook, it can be just as bad. I'm not on Facebook as much, and I find myself spending less and less time on Facebook these days, partially because I feel like I just see ads. That's like all I see are like ads. But also because there is a lot of craziness on there. I mean, like, all the anti-vaxxer stuff, and there's always something on there that someone's sharing that, everyone's there saying, no, this is not true. Like, this is, look at the website this is coming from. This is an anti-vaxxer site, or something like that. And it just sort of seems like, initially when it felt like it was so amazing to be able to connect and keep all these people in your life that you haven't seen for so long. Now it's like, do I really want these people in my life? After all, I'm not really sure. Like so many people from high school have just gone like way far off the edge, and conspiracy theories and stuff, and I'm just sort of like, there's a reason I lost touch with these people in the first place. So I think Facebook is probably going to go down before Twitter does.
And why do people feel like we all want to hear their opinions about everything? That's what this whole thing is. People come up with this stuff and they put it out there like we care.
Yeah, well, it's sort of shouting into the void.
Good
I mean,
and bad.
yeah.
It's awful. Shut up, I wanna say.
I mean, I have a problem with people putting their opinion out there, you know, but it's when, I mean, there's dumbasses out there who just say stuff and people, you know, sometimes someone will harass me and I'll go look at their timeline and I'm like, this guy's not even worth it because this is a really stupid human being. Like, just looking at the stuff that they say. You know, my issue, I mean, it's like blogging. It's, you know, it's basically a microblog. Anybody can have a blog. You can say whatever crazy stuff you want, and people don't have to read it. But when you come at someone in their mentions, you can't go through the mentions without looking at everything people say to you. So you're gonna see it, and I think like that's where the real problems come in.
Well, you obviously have thousands and thousands of followers on Twitter, and I mean, I find on Twitter that I tend to just be a hit and run. I just want to see like what Donald Trump is saying and then freak out and then run away. But it's interesting when you do make a comment, then suddenly you get these people who are following you.
Yeah.
But for me, it's easy to go in and go, oh my God, this is like a crazy person, and I can block them.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with so many people hitting your site, hitting your Twitter feed every day, how do you manage that? I mean,
Katie Nolan, who is on ESPN, she told me once to stay out of my mentions. She's like, just post what you want to post, and then just, that's it. But, you know, one of the things for me that attracted me to Twitter was the connection with people. And, you know, especially like during baseball season, like Cubs Twitter is great. I mean, that we all want to sit on there and talk about the game together. I don't know. I mean, I try different things. I go through phases where I can just post and run and I don't have to look. Other times I really sort of crave that interaction with people, especially if it's on a certain topic or something interesting has happened. And then it's hard to not look at what people are saying back to you. And there's days where, you know, I've got everybody pretty much filtered and blocked. So if you've harassed me before, I'm not going to see it now. But the problem is that people keep making new accounts.
Right.
And so Twitter is giving you some filters. Block lists are a great way to go. You can block anybody who has like less than 15 followers, who account's been made in the last 6 months, and that sort of helps with some of that stuff. But you know, they do sort of get through. And it's like when you post an article and everyone tells you don't read the comments. And of course, you go read the comments because you want to see what people are going to say. It's sort of like a self-defeating behavior, and I'm not really sure what to do about it. I know it's going to happen, but I can't not look. So, you know, actually starting a podcast has been one of the greatest things for me because it keeps me so busy that I don't have time to just sit there and scroll through my Twitter feed as much as I used to. So that's been great, but I really think there is an element of willpower to it. I don't know if anybody's watching Shrill on Hulu, but they just had the episode where Lindy West, which is kind of an infamous moment in her career, she writes this great piece and then she goes to look at the comments to see, because she wants the positive feedback, you know, which I think is something else that people really underestimate about Twitter, is the constant positive feedback. When you write a story or you do something that people like, and then you have all these people saying good things to you, hey, great job, I love this, it's really interesting. It's like an endorphin rush, and then it's the exact opposite when you see the other stuff. So it's sort of like if you're craving that positive reinforcement, it's hard, you don't get that without getting the other stuff, you know, you can't just get one. So, but you know, this great scene where she's sort of scrolling down and she's reading all these great comments, and then there's a comment with a picture of a pig and a guy calling her a pig and, you know, stuff. And that's sort of, that was so true to life for me, that you're just sitting there going about your day, happily talking with your friends on Twitter, and then all of a sudden someone like threatens to kill you, and you're just like, what? And it's sort of like record scratch noise, you know, and you're like, what just happened? But it's definitely a weird platform, and you know, that's sort of where we are.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming, and I think there's probably more questions, but we're at the end of the time that you had for us.
Sure.
So if people would like to stay and continue for a few minutes.
Yeah, for
this
sure,
would be okay,
absolutely.
but I know some of you have to go teach too, so I just add one more, because that's what you're good at.
Oh.
Thank you so much for open conversation. It's really a great way to get us started and get our
I'm glad, I'm glad.
about
I'm glad I could
these
do it.
issues.
Thank you.